The prison in El Salvador, where Kilmar Abrego Garcia was sent, the Trump administration says by mistake, is one of the largest maximum security prisons in Latin America. In recent weeks, that prison has become a kind of photo op for members of the Trump administration and his Republican supporters in the U.S. Congress. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem toured the prison in March, posting an Abu Ghraib-style video and photos of herself in front of a crowded cell. This week, Republican Congressman Jason Smith of Missouri posted his own photo from inside the prison in El Salvador. So did Republican Congressman Riley Moore of West Virginia, who shared this photo, double thumbs up, in front of the cells of the prison. Today, another lawmaker arrived in El Salvador, this time a Democrat, and he's there for a very different reason. He is the senior senator from the state where Kilmar Abrego Garcia lived with his family until the Trump administration had him arrested and took him to this foreign prison in a move the administration, again, admitted was what they called an administrative error. Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland landed in El Salvador today with the hope that he might see Mr. Abrego Garcia or be able to talk to him.
I hope to meet with some high-level government officials from El Salvador. As I've said before, the goal of my visit is to talk to people here about the release of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I told his wife and his family I would do everything possible to bring him home, and we're going to keep working at this until we're successful. I also hope to have the chance to meet with him, but we'll have a better idea if that works out a little later on.
Senator Van Hollen landing in El Salvador today, hoping for a chance to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia in that prison. Senator Van Hollen says the vice president of El Salvador told him he would not be able to do that when he met with him today. Joining us now for the interview is Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, who joins us from El Salvador. Senator, thank you so much for what you're doing and for being here with us tonight. I know it's been a very long day.
It has, Rachel, but as you said in the intro, I promised Kilmar's family that I would do everything I could to bring him home because, as you said, a court in the United States has determined that he was illegally abducted from the United States and landed in the most notorious prison in El Salvador. So that's why I raised these issues directly with the vice president of El Salvador. The president is not in the country now, so I met with the vice president to talk about these issues and ask for the opportunity to go visit Kilmar.
What's sort of the range of potential outcomes here that you think are possible? What are you hoping to accomplish on this trip? And how did those expectations match up with the experience that you had today meeting with the country's vice president and hearing what you did from him?
Well, my goal is to keep a spotlight on this issue until justice is done, until the 9-0 opinion by the Supreme Court is implemented by the Trump administration, which is ignoring entirely that order that they need to facilitate his return. I asked the folks at the embassy whether they'd been ordered by the administration to do anything to facilitate his return. The answer was no, so they're clearly not in compliance. And I said to the vice president of El Salvador, look, you've got somebody in your worst prison, the prison for terrorists, who the United States court has said has committed no crime. And so I asked him if he had any evidence that Kilmar was a member of MS-13 or had committed any crimes. And he said, no. So I asked him why he was keeping Kilmar in prison here. And his answer was that essentially the Trump administration is paying the government of El Salvador taxpayer money to keep this person here despite the court orders. So my goal, Rachel, is to make sure that we keep the spotlight on this issue because I think it's unsustainable. It's unsustainable to continue to keep a person who has not been convicted of a crime in the worst prison in El Salvador when the Trump administration admitted itself to a judge that this was a mistake. But instead of fixing the mistake, they fired the Justice Department lawyer who admitted it was a mistake.
I just want to underscore what you just said there, that you were told by the U.S. Embassy in El Salvador that they have received no request from the White House or from the Justice Department, from any other entity in Washington, asking them to take any steps to obtain the release of Mr. Abrego Garcia. Presumably, it's the local U.S. officials at the embassy there who would be the relevant point of contact, first point of contact for the U.S. government trying to attain that outcome, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. And it is pretty clear that the Trump administration has not lifted a finger to implement that court order. And so I think it's important that the courts know that, and they will know that. And again, denying his family an opportunity to even have a phone call with Kilmar is just a gross violation of basic human rights and human decency. And, I asked the vice president if I came back next week, whether or not I could go visit Kilmar. And the answer was no, he couldn't guarantee that. I said, look, I may be the first member of Congress here, the first senator, but I can assure you more will be coming. And you cannot continue to keep this man locked up in this worst prison in El Salvador, and one of the worst in the hemisphere, when he hasn't committed a crime. And so we're going to keep at this. And I asked the vice president just to let him out the gate, because you may remember at the White House, the president of El Salvador said, well, we can't smuggle Kilmar back into the United States. He said, you don't have to smuggle him back to the United States. We know you can't do that. Just open the prison door. And Attorney General Pam Bondi said the United States would send a plane down here. And if she doesn't, at least he would be free for now in El Salvador as we work to find a way to get him back into the court system and due process in the United States. Again, nothing.
You mentioned that other...
So...
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I think this is, of course, about the family and making sure the family gets justice. But it's also, as you say, about the Trump administration trying to deprive individuals in the United States of their liberty without any due process, right? This is like taking away people's freedom. That does not sound like a conservative idea to me. That is something that, of course, authoritarian governments engage in, and it's a very fast road to tyranny if we don't all stand up against it.
You mentioned the possibility, and now it seems like the likelihood, that other members of Congress are going to make their way to El Salvador. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey has expressed interest in going. Congressman Maxwell Frost, the young congressman from Florida, has formally requested a congressional delegation, a CODEL, to El Salvador. Given that a couple of Republican members of Congress who are supporters of what Trump has done using this prison have somehow gotten into the prison and been able to take photo ops there, given that the Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, was able to get in and do a photo op there. I wonder what you make of the El Salvadoran government sort of opening the door to allow Trump administration officials and Republican supporters of President Trump in there to make essentially social media content while still denying you the opportunity to get inside.
Well, you're right. That's clearly what's happening. I mean, you have the government of El Salvador, the president of El Salvador, make this deal with the Trump administration. I think it's $15 million that the Trump administration is going to be paying El Salvador to essentially take these folks from the United States who have been denied due process in the case of Kilmar. And again, Republicans seem to be happy to take photo ops at this site and celebrate the fact that the President of the United States is ignoring court orders and that the government of El Salvador is keeping this guy locked up who's committed no crime at all. So I do think, though, as we continue to put the spotlight on this injustice, that they ultimately will have to let him go. I believe that will be the case because I believe people will keep pressing for justice.
Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen joining us live tonight from El Salvador. Sir, thank you again for making time to be here and helping us understand this and explain it to our audience. Please keep us apprised. I know a lot of people are worried about you being there, given what's going on between our government and the government of El Salvador and the kind of language used by their president in talking about this standoff. So please be safe, keep us apprised, and we'll look forward to having you back on soon.
Will do. Thank you, Rachel.
Good evening. I'm Simone Sanders Townsend. Today, folks, the judiciary did what it was meant to do. Check a president who defied the rule of law, a sobering moment in our American democracy. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg said he found probable cause to hold the Trump administration in criminal contempt for violating his orders to turn around planes carrying deportees to El Salvador. The 46-page decision was unsparing, accusing the Trump administration of knowingly defying his very direct orders. To say that Boasberg has had enough is truly an understatement. This stands as a stunning escalation, but frankly, one that most likely will not move the administration into compliance, given that it has been openly defying court orders in a myriad of cases, including the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. A Maryland federal judge had ordered his return, but the Trump administration has said no.
Now, MS-13 is characterized, as they should be, as an FTO, as a foreign terrorist organization. So he is not coming back to our country. President Bukele said he was not sending him back. That's the end of the story.
I didn't know you could tell a judge no. And also, I will note that the Attorney General, nor the White House, nor the President of the United States, nor El Salvador has given us any evidence that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a criminal. Zero evidence. I mean, it's important to say. Folks, the judge in that case is also considering finding the administration in contempt. Yep. Boasberg warned that he would, in fact, refer the matter for prosecution if the Trump administration did not obey by returning to U.S. custody those who were sent to El Salvador. Joining me now is Congressman Ro Khanna of California and Melissa Murray, NYU law professor, MSNBC legal analyst, and co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Honestly, I've had it just as much as it seems like Judge Boasberg in this 46-page directive, if you will. Congressman, can I just start with you? We are seeing at least one of the guardrails that our founding fathers intended on working, that is the judiciary. Your thoughts about the developments today, and frankly, the fact that the Trump administration is actively defying other court orders as we speak.
It's a betrayal of the American experiment. Look, in J.D. Vance and Donald Trump's America, police can knock on an immigrant's door, deport them to a dictatorship without any due process. Now, the Supreme Court, 9-0, said that Abrego is entitled to due process here. It's important to realize it's not that El Salvador came and kidnapped him. We sent him there. We can certainly demand that he return. And J.D. Vance exposed everything when he tweeted out saying he's not even concerned about a pretense of compliance with the Supreme Court. He just believes that immigrants should not get due process. Well, you have a sitting vice president who's saying to defy the Supreme Court and saying that the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution and due process is irrelevant, and all that matters is what he thinks. This is an unprecedented crisis in our country's history.
Unprecedented crisis. Melissa, you're a constitutional law expert here. There's a key quote from Boasberg's ruling. He noted defendants offer various imaginative arguments for why they nevertheless technically complied with the order. None of their positions would stand scrutiny. He also writes, defendants protest that the Supreme Court has since vacated the TROs. How can contempt lie? The Supreme Court long ago answered that question. It's firmly settled that a court order must be obeyed until it is reversed for error by the issuing court. Make it make sense, Melissa.
Sure. So Judge Boasberg in that passage is referring to the fact that the Supreme Court actually vacated his initial order on a procedural ground, that the case should have been filed in the Fifth Circuit, where the detainees had actually been before they were then rendered to El Salvador. So they took it out of Judge Boasberg's chambers and moved it to that other court. But the point he is making is that before that happened, before the Supreme Court acted, he had issued this order to the government to ask them to provide those detainees with due process, to let them have an opportunity to explain whether they had been removed in error or whether these charges against them were in error. And that order had to stand, and they had to comply with it until the Supreme Court removed it and put it into another court. So that's the point that he's making there. But I just wanted to address this broader question about the courts here. The courts are doing a Herculean job right now, standing up to this administration, but it's not really the job that they were intended to do, or at least not what they were intended to do alone. This is a tripartite system of government. The judiciary is just one branch. The other branch is Congress. And I would say here, with all due respect to Congressman Khanna, who I know from law school, Congress has completely abdicated the field here. And I know that the Democrats are not in a majority here, but this is a situation where a president is acting so lawlessly that Congress should be empowered to act, whether it is through oversight, whether it is through the power of the purse. Turn off the lights in the White House until there is compliance with the judicial order. There are lots of things that Congress can do if it has the will to do it, if it is acting on behalf of the American people. And that is the question here, too.
Congressman, I guess, is there anything you think that would move your Republican colleagues to assert what is their constitutional authority to do their jobs as being a co-equal branch of government? They are currently acting like an extension of the executive branch.
The one place that they've started to have doubts is on the capricious tariff policy, because the one thing in America you can't do is destroy people's money and wealth. And you have had some Republicans speak up. Their constituents' retirement plans have been hurt. The farmers have been hurt. Small businesses have been hurt. But what I believe, and Melissa's absolutely right, is that Congress needs to act. Look, when Brown versus Board of Education came out, the Southerners, in a shameful moment of history in Congress, passed a House resolution, or didn't pass it, introduced it, condemning Brown versus Board of Education. It was, unfortunately, a very powerful document. We need to, in my view right now, have a House resolution, make it as bipartisan, saying that the president has to comply with the Supreme Court. And then you need to use the power of the purse to make sure that happens. We also need an emergency DNC meeting that people have called for. I think the American people get the urgency. Frankly, I don't think enough people in Congress do, and so I think the critique is valid.
For the first time in nearly 4 decades, the Olympics are returning to Los Angeles, California. Today, we got a look at where many of the venues for the 2028 Summer Games will be, from Long Beach to Pasadena, Dodger Stadium, even the Universal Studios lot. Now, this is a big deal because when the world's biggest sport event comes to your country, you get a lot of tourists, a ton of revenue, global prestige that comes with hosting the games. Last year's Paris Olympics had more than 11 million paying visitors, and of course, many more TV viewers watching and saying to themselves, you know, we should visit Paris sometime. And under normal circumstances, LA could expect to see similar benefits. Last year, officials predicted the LA Olympics could generate $7 billion in revenue, with a significant chunk of that coming from foreign tourists. But circumstances aren't exactly normal, are they? Donald Trump's entire shtick as president is that America is being ripped off by foreigners, and we're kicking people out, not letting people in. Heck, we've canceled the visas of more than 1,000 foreign students in U.S. colleges, let many of them be hunted down for deportation with no due process. Our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, says, if you think the wrong way, we don't really need you. Listen to this. Visiting America is not an entitlement, he writes. It is a privilege extended to those who respect our laws and values. It's policy born out of the general MAGA worldview that says that foreigners are taking from our society without contributing. Here's the thing to remember, since we're also in this trade war that might crater the American economy. America has always run a huge trade surplus with the rest of the world in one particular industry: tourism to America, right? People have always wanted to visit the United States. They come from all over the world, and they visit our institutions and our shops and our museums and eat in our restaurants and stay in our hotels. The U.S. travel industry says it generated $1.3 trillion last year and supported 15 million American jobs. That's not just from foreign families on holiday. Much of it also comes from an educational system that was the envy of the world until a couple of months ago. Because the world also sends its budding scientists and engineers and doctors to America to get educated, and then Americans, again, take their tuition dollars, right? This is one of those places where the flow of dollars go from the foreigners to the Americans. We also get the benefit of incredibly smart people coming to our country where they do research here in America that helps American health and enterprise. I mean, everyone understands and knows this at some level. Even MAGA people grasp the concept when the foreigner in question is, for instance, a certain South African migrant who, oh, how'd he get here? Right, he made his way to study at the University of Pennsylvania before he started a bunch of companies, becoming the world's richest man. His immigration status during those early years, a little unclear, by the way. Again, this is a very common story, and now the U.S. is basically trying to chase all these people out with these ludicrous mass visa cancellations, which appeared to start as a kind of ideological crusade against people that had like wrongthink on the issue of the war in Gaza. But now they're just on this just incomprehensibly capricious spree where they appear to be just getting anyone that's got any kind of infractions, including people who had none that are maybe made up or an error. Like, here's one example in the case of Suguru Anda. He's a Japanese grad student in computer science at Brigham Young University, okay? He's married with 5 children, 2 of whom were born here in the U.S. ICE told Anda his visa has been revoked because they found a criminal record for him, okay? But he only has 2 speeding tickets on his record, as well as a catch and release violation from a fishing trip in 2019, which was dismissed by a court. Nevertheless, he and his family may be forced out of the country before the end of the month for 2 speeding tickets and a fishing violation, which was dismissed. And of course, Trump persecution extends beyond college students. Border officials in Houston detained and deported an Australian man who had more than a year left on his work visa. He'd been trying to get back to the States after attending an overseas memorial for his sister. He says U.S. officials called him an epithet and told him Trump is back in town. We're doing things the way we always should have been doing them. Now, the effect of all this on people coming to this great country and on U.S. tourism is exactly what you'd expect it to be. See all those charts? See what direction they go? It's from the Financial Times, and it shows how travel from Europe to the U.S. has already cratered under Trump. Foreign dollars that would have flowed here, not going here. It's happening elsewhere, too. New data this week shows that arrivals of non-citizens to the U.S. by plane dropped almost 10% in March from a year earlier. And Canadian flight reservations to the U.S. are down 70% through September versus the same period last year, another study found. That's Canada, which accounts for, get this, more than a quarter of tourism to the U.S. In a new worst-case estimate, Goldman Sachs says reduced travel and boycotts could cost the U.S. almost $90 billion in lost GDP this year alone. Again, stress this enough. That's money that flows from foreigners to Americans that Donald Trump, in his infinite wisdom, has decided to possibly choke off. Trump can bray all he wants about sticking it to those no-good foreigners, but in the same way it's actually Americans who are going to be the ones to pay the tariffs. When it comes to his and Marco Rubio's war on tourism, it's Americans that are going to pay the price.
Greg Bluestein is senior political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and an MSNBC political contributor. He was at Green's event last night. Stuart Stevens is a senior advisor for the Lincoln Project. He helped lead Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign as author of It Was All a Lie. Good to have you both here, guys. So, Greg, take us inside that event in Georgia. What did you see? How did it feel? Was it different than town halls you've been to in the past?
Very different from past town halls. It felt more like a fortified campaign event than a typical town hall. There was about 30 law enforcement officers. There was even mounted patrols outside this suburban community center in Cobb County, where Marjorie Taylor Greene held this town hall. Hundreds of protesters were outside. And it's not a free-for-all. Hundreds outside, but this is no free-for-all. Each participant who was actually invited inside was pre-screened. They were made sure that they were constituents, and they had to go through security. So this was a very carefully calibrated event.
Stuart, is there a political playbook for dealing with this, or is this just genuinely a new moment that we're seeing? When you're talking about people getting tased, when you're talking about near fistfights breaking out, when you're talking about arrests. I mean, I've been to some town halls where, I'm not going to lie, I need a little coffee, just to stay awake. What is going on here?
Well, it's particularly interesting. This is Cobb County, which is not known as a revolutionary, insurrectionist, Bolshevik spot. This is classic suburban America. The closest thing I think we've seen to anything of this would have been leading up to the 2010 election with the anger over Obamacare. And what happened then? It was a disastrous wipeout for Democrats in the 2010. And that sort of smell that you feel, that you're here, that you can sense, is fear from the Republicans. They have this sense that they're on this car, the car is headed toward the cliff, and they don't know how to stop it, and they don't know how to get out of the car. It's when you do things that people have never done before for a reason. Talk about cutting Social Security. When you're cutting Social Security offices, when you're talking about slashing government agencies directly helping people, from FEMA to the FAA to Center for Disease Control. All of this is stuff that people care about. And of course they're angry. And out of Washington, you have Elon Musk, who is completely impervious to any of this. Whatever happens isn't going to affect Elon Musk. He's going to fly a private plane. He's going to have private doctors. None of this. He's not going to be dependent on Social Security. And there's this whole sense when you have a government run by billionaires, which is what we have now, that they're just completely out of touch with this. And if I was a Republican, I would be very, very nervous.
It's interesting. I mean, if you're Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I think she won 2/3 of the vote last time, you're probably not too worried, and you can afford to handle things the way that she did. There was also Chuck Grassley. There was a moment in his event in Iowa, and by the way, he had 56% of the vote the last time he ran. But again, wow, when he was asked about the controversy over Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man mistakenly deported to El Salvador, this is what happened.
Are you going to bring that guy back from El Salvador? Yeah. Why not?
Well, because that's not power of Congress.
The Supreme Court said to bring him back.
Yeah, but
the president hasn't.
what can they do?
He's defined the Constitution.
Trump don't care.
If I get an order to pay a ticket for $1,200 and I just say no, does that stand up? Because he's got an order from the Supreme Court and he's just said no.
Yeah. He just said screw it.
The president of that country is not subject to our U.S. Supreme Court.
If Trump wanted to bring him back, bring him back. I'm pissed.
It doesn't sound like the good folks of Iowa were buying that. And it wasn't the only time it came up in Florida. The crowd shouted and booed when Congressman Brian Mast tried to defend the administration's handling of that situation. Are we getting to the point, do you think, Stuart, where these staunch Trump defenders start to lose some of their resolve in standing up for the president's policies?
Yeah, I'm glad you focused on Senator Grassley. I used to work for Senator Grassley. Very interesting guy, started his career in politics as a labor leader who has been greatly loved in Iowa. And that if Chuck Grassley is getting this sort of pushback.
At 91, really, I think, isn't he like 91 now?
Yeah, yep, he is. This is just, if people care about this stuff. And I know there's this sense that, well, this one person who's been deported, but Americans have always felt that we had this rule of law, that the Supreme Court would be recognized. And even now, at a period when the Supreme Court is at the lowest approval level it's ever been in public polling, they had a 9-0 decision on this, which is just extraordinary. And yet the White House seems completely willing to ignore it, or to say that this isn't really what the ruling said. And I think Look, what did people vote for Trump? And what are they getting? They voted for lower prices. Prices are higher. They voted for, some voted to end the war in Ukraine. The war is more intense than ever. People voted for lower egg prices. They're through the roof. You have the stock market is in turmoil. Everybody that has stocks has less money now than they did the day Trump was sworn in. What's the benefit here? What are you getting in this bargain? I voted for Donald Trump. It's a transaction. What am I getting? And I think the answer is that people are looking at that and they're feeling that they're not getting at all what they wanted. And those are people who voted for Trump.
All right, Dan, what did you hear in Jay Powell's warning today? Because, gosh, the market certainly didn't like it, and people are worried.
Yeah, there are two things, though. You just mentioned the chip situation, right? So it's not just that there's export bans that are going on. It's not just that there's going to be a lack of demand. I mean, for these companies that don't have the clarity about where they're going to be able to sell their wares, when you think about it, one of the big ones was NVIDIA. You know, the CEO of this company, this was one of the largest market cap companies in the world last year, $3.5 trillion. They are selling their chips all over the world. The Biden administration actually put these export bans in place. So the CEO of this company goes down to Mar-a-Lago a couple weeks ago. He thinks he has a deal where they're going to be able to sell some of these high-end chips to China. And then all of a sudden, you get this sort of announcement that you got today. And it's not really a clear announcement. I think a lot of these companies don't know. So if they don't know what they're going to be able to sell to and to where, it makes them kind of pull back a little bit in the way in which they kind of operate their businesses. This is one of the big areas when you talk about potential growth or the weakening of growth around the world. So now let's flash forward to Jerome Powell. What is he focused on? He has a dual mandate, right? Full employment and stable prices. He's concerned about that stable prices aspect right now. If they don't have clarity about the tariffs, how long a trade war might last, then they are worried that you're going to see higher prices, right? And then what you're going to see is higher unemployment, right? Yep. So for him, he's kind of stuck here. He's got a meeting coming up on May 7th. The president's going to start putting a lot of pressure on him to cut interest rates. We've been talking about this for a while now. That will not be good for that stable prices sort of situation. So the Fed Chair Powell is in a difficult spot, but he's navigating.
He's been in since he got the job.
Which is a great point. Trump is the one who appointed him, right? And so he had COVID to deal with. He had this inflation spike to deal with, and he's actually done a pretty good job. Yeah. So let's see what sort of pressure Trump puts on him into this May 7th meeting.
Do we know anything about this meeting with the Japanese today? I mean, Trump's quote was big progress.
Not a whole lot of details, no. I mean, other than the fact that they were here and that they were there, I guess I should say, in Washington, and that they were meeting and working towards something. But, yeah, not a lot of details. I do want to piggyback on what you were just saying.
Please.
And on what you were saying, which is if there's anything we learned from Trump 1.0, it's that he loves to tussle with the Fed chair, and he's going to do it again. The pressure that he's going to bring to bear on Jay Powell to try to bring interest rates down and to.
But hasn't Jay Powell shown us? Come at me, bro. I'm not being impacted.
So did Janet Yellen. But it's going to be a thing, and then there's going to be a thing about who replaces Jay Powell.
Well, we'll soon find out. John, can we just take a political look at this, right? I'm trying to look at what Trump's doing, and here's what I see. Tell me if I'm wrong. He is trying to, it's not that we don't have manufacturing here. We have a ton of manufacturing. We've optimized it, so we do the smart manufacturing. What it looks like he's trying to bring back is the lowest level, low-skilled manufacturing en masse. He wants to deport the immigrants who are currently doing the lowest skilled jobs in the United States. He wants to bring back big coal. And at the same time, he wants to cut funding for research and education, the things that actually advance our economy and advance the next generation. Tell me if I'm wrong here, and if I'm right, how is this a game plan, a positive game plan for the future that any member of his party or a large voting base is down with?
It's not a real plan that's reality-based in an interdependent world economy where investment in growth means R&D, means research, means, you know, all these other sectors, right? And we've been doing a decent job starting to reshoring essential manufacturing. That's responsible. Biden administration did. That's one of the lessons from COVID. But I think this is part of what J.D. Vance sort of brings on the ticket. And you know, a lot of cities in Ohio hollowed out in that region. My mother's from Youngstown, Ohio. I've seen that negative impact decades ago.
I mean, globalization helped us overall, but there are communities, there are areas, there's parts of our country and our economy that have suffered.
Absolutely. And companies that didn't feel a duty to their communities right? I mean, there's a certain problem when you start, putting shareholder supremacy over long-term value creation, when things start being too driven by quarterly results and not about long-term value creation for communities as well as the country. But this ain't the way to deal with that.
And also, no rules have changed to make companies change their priorities.
Not only that, and you can create different incentives around it, but it's actually worse, because what are the companies going to do in this advancing uncertainty and the prospect of trade wars, which are, being priced in, and fighting with Canada and all this crap? What you're going to see is a lot of these companies going to try to say, well, we're not going to be able to respond quick enough to build those factories. So guess who's going to get screwed? Workers. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to go to increased automation through AI. So it's going to end up hurting the very people they're trying to help.
Charles, I can't find any serious person who looks at the Trump rollout and they feel good about it. I find two groups of people who continue to defend the president. It's those in his inner circle who have this idea that they can be the Gary Cohn, Steve Mnuchin's of this administration, kind of saving him from his worst instincts, or business people that are getting carve-outs or direct hookups to enrich themselves, like, they're just going to build a big castle with a moat around it. And those carve-outs, those hookups are not illegal, but they're certainly not healthy for smart business or policy making on the world stage.
No, they're not. And I think one of the things that's been so interesting about this, Stephanie, is that for the first 60 to 75 days of the Trump administration, one of the things that they did is double down on their sort of narrative control. And they've been pushing that as a distraction to what they haven't dealt with, which is the economy. You saw it. We leaned into DEI. We leaned into deportation. These were all smokescreens to get away from the fact that we really don't necessarily have a viable plan to fix the things that we said we were going to fix and that were most important to Americans, according to what they said when they voted. And now you're not able to do that as much because we're seeing day after day after day the volatility in the market, which is making more and more people nervous. So what I'm looking at going forward is, how are you going to get away when you don't have this distraction technique as far as narrative control to deal with, and you're talking about not only your administration but the rest of your party, and they have to deal with it.
We need to say trade wars are bad for Main Street as well as Wall Street, right? They rise prices. They're not going to lower the price of eggs or anything else. The other thing is if you see an administration that admires Orban, that gave Orban shout-outs at the national convention throughout the campaign, you know whose economy is not something you want to base it on? Hungary.
Correct.
You want to double down on what makes America actually great, which is free markets, free trade, free people.
Wall Street can also make a ton of money during a recession or volatile markets. You can bet against the market. Businesses can't bet against themselves.
Yeah, I mean, businesses just don't know what to do right now. One thing I'll just say about growth, and, we can talk about the stock market, we can talk about the S&P 500 down 10%, is down 15% from those recent highs. But at the end of the day, you really got to focus on the economy. You got to really focus on, what we are going to be able to do as far as consolidating, our understanding of where the economy can go, right? If we can kind of really get our arms around the tariff situation. Because, Charles and I were just talking about this before. I mean, the economy was starting to weaken a little bit here, right? And if you think about through the lens of the market, we saw this post November 6th sort of thing. You saw, companies and sectors that were going to benefit from deregulation, from lower taxes, from, a whole host of other things. We saw crypto go higher. It all reversed before we even started talking about.
So why if the president really wanted to address the economic issues that were plaguing Americans, deregulation and tax cuts, while it might not have made Main Street happy, certainly we can help big business.
In 2017, they went for tax first, right? And they got that, and that was a buoy to the economy. It was a buoy to the markets. And then they started focusing on trade, tariffs, and the like here. And they didn't really go particularly aggressive. So a lot of folks that I talked to, they can't really understand why they came out so hard with the trade stuff. And they started with our allies.
But to Stephanie's point, though, I do think that everything that we're talking about, whether it's the tariffs, whether it's ultimately what's going to happen with the interest rates, whether it's the refinance of a big portion of our federal debt in June, all of those things make sense to us. But to someone who's on Main Street, they don't understand that. But what they do understand is that prices for what they need to get in their homes and put on the dinner table are not changing.
Okay,
and
well, the prices are going to go up when the administration closes the loophole next month that allows those super low-cost goods from China to come, from Temu, from Shein, from what Amazon sells, what Walmart sells. That's going to, it was Scott Bessent, who a few months ago said, you know, the American dream isn't to buy low-cost goods. It's not, but it's the American way. And when this hits next month, that's going to hit voters across this country.
Of course it is. And that's going to add to the affordability crisis, the middle-class squeeze that's fueled a lot of anger. But I got to say, I got very little patience for folks on Wall Street who seem to be saying, you know, they backed Trump because they were pissed off about DEI or whatever else. And they said, you know what, he's not really going to do tariffs. This is a more responsible, mature Donald Trump. I've looked in his eyes and seen his soul. And then they're saying, oh, you know, he actually did what he said he was going to do. Of course he did. He was campaigning on tariffs across the board. Folks didn't talk about it. They didn't want to deal with that reality. They created this circumstance, and they're reaping the whirlwind.
Okay, that takes us to Jeff. And those same people for the last 2 weeks have been praying at the altar of Scott Bessent, believing he's going to save the day, watching this White House jockeying, saying, is he closer to Trump? Is he in Trump's ear? Where's Scott this week?
Abroad. Yeah, not in Washington doing the trade deals, which
and
goes
remember,
to...
he was the one who was going to negotiate with Japan. We
Correct.
were told that a week ago.
Yeah, and also like he's the one who's saying we can get 90 deals with 90 countries done in 90 days. Did I say that right?
Yes,
yeah.
you said it right,
okay, just
but it won't
sure
happen.
It sounds crazy, right?
Sounded wrong.
Just checking.
But and just kind of to pull all this together too, like what was Bill Clinton's slogan in '92? It's the economy, stupid. The economy and the politics are all going to come together. The midterms are a long way off, but if the president isn't able to deliver on bringing those prices down, that's going to have a political hit, and it will probably have a political hit for his party. That said, I would quibble just a little bit with what you said, Charles, earlier about the smokescreen. I think what he did on DEI and what he did on immigration weren't just a smokescreen. Those are his priorities. So are tariffs. And he's gone right in with that because he wants to kick it hard in his first 100 days or first year and a half. But the politics and the economy part eventually might burn.